The sun over Iran burned like fire. The sand stretched endlessly, glowing like gold during the day and like ashes at night. In that vast desert, 20 Christians were walking, barefoot, bound, and surrounded by armed men who hated their faith. Their hands were tied behind their backs with rough ropes. The hot wind blew dust into their eyes, but none of them cried. They walked in silence, whispering prayers under their breath. Every step they took sank deep into the sand, but they kept walking. Among them was a young man named Yusuf. He was only 23. His eyes were filled with peace, not fear. Around him were fathers, mothers, and even a boy who looked no older than 16. They were all captured because they refused to deny Jesus. The soldiers shouted at them in harsh voices, waving their swords. "You will die in this desert," one of them yelled, but Yusuf looked up at the sky. The sun was sinking, painting the sky red, and he whispered, "Even if we die here, Jesus will meet us." That sentence echoed in the wind. The others looked at him. Something stirred inside their hearts. Even the weakest among them began to feel a strange strength rise within. When night fell, the soldiers made them kneel on the cold sand. The stars above glittered like 1,000 eyes watching. The desert was silent, except for the crackling of the torches. The leader of the soldiers stepped forward. His face was covered, only his eyes could be seen, hard, cold, without mercy. He lifted his sword and said, "You have one chance. Deny your Christ, and live." No one moved. No one spoke. The youngest boy, trembling, whispered, "We cannot deny him. He saved us." The leader's eyes narrowed. He shouted something in anger and raised his sword higher. The soldiers began sharpening their blades, and the air filled with the sound of metal scraping metal, a chilling sound that sent shivers through the night. Yusuf looked at the others and said softly, "Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul." His words spread through the group like fire. They closed their eyes and began to sing a quiet song. It was broken and trembling, but it carried power. The soldiers grew angry. "Silence them," one shouted, but the song grew louder. Their voices rose against the desert wind. "Jesus, you are with us, even in the fire. Even in death, you are near." The leader could not bear the sound. He roared, "Enough!" He lifted his sword. The desert held its breath. The moonlight glinted on the blade as it swung down through the air. But something strange happened. The wind changed. The torches flickered wildly. A sound like thunder rolled through the sky, though there were no clouds. The ground trembled beneath their knees. The soldiers froze, staring around in confusion. A blinding light appeared at the edge of the desert, brighter than the moon, brighter than any fire. It moved toward them, slow but powerful. The 20 Christians lifted their heads. Tears ran down their faces, not of fear, but of awe. "Jesus," Yusuf whispered. The soldiers began to back away, their hands shaking. The swords slipped from their grasp and fell into the sand. And then the light stopped in front of them. It was just the beginning of the miracle. Chapter 2. The light stood still before them. It wasn't like any light from fire or sun. It was alive. It moved gently, breathing like the wind, glowing with warmth that touched every heart. The soldiers fell to their knees, covering their faces. Some dropped their weapons. Others trembled so hard they couldn't stand. The leader shouted, "What is this?" But his voice cracked with fear. The 20 Christians stared at the light. The desert, moments ago cruel and cold, now felt holy. Even the sand seemed to shimmer beneath the glow. Then, from within the light, a voice came. It wasn't loud, yet it filled the air like thunder. It wasn't soft, yet it calmed every trembling heart. The voice said, "Do not fear, for I am with you." Every sound in the desert stopped. Even the wind held its breath. The believers began to weep. Yusuf fell to his face and whispered, "My Lord, my Jesus." And then something extraordinary happened. The ropes around their hands began to fall apart. Not cut, not torn, just vanished. The knots loosened, and the ropes turned to dust, carried away by the wind. The soldiers gasped. They stepped back, staring in disbelief. The leader rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick, but the truth was clear. One of the older women lifted her hands and cried, "He has set us free." The light grew brighter, wrapping them in a soft glow that healed their wounds. The bruises from beatings faded. The pain in their feet disappeared. Even their tiredness melted away. But something else was happening, something even greater. The light began to move toward the soldiers. They screamed and tried to run, but the desert ground seemed to hold them still. The light stood still before them. It wasn't like any light from fire or sun. It was alive. It moved gently, breathing like the wind, glowing with warmth that touched every heart. The soldiers fell to their knees, covering their faces. Some dropped their weapons. Others trembled so hard they couldn't stand. The leader shouted, "What is this?" But his voice cracked with fear. The 20 Christians stared at the light. The desert, moments ago cruel and cold, now felt holy. Even the sand seemed to shimmer beneath the glow. Then, from within the light, a voice came. It wasn't loud, yet it filled the air like thunder. It wasn't soft, yet it calmed every trembling heart. The voice said, "Do not fear, for I am with you." Every sound in the desert stopped. Even the wind held its breath. The believers began to weep. Yusuf fell to his face and whispered, "My Lord, my Jesus." And then something extraordinary happened. The ropes around their hands began to fall apart, not cut, not torn, just vanished. The knots loosened, and the ropes turned to dust, carried away by the wind. The soldiers gasped. They stepped back, staring in disbelief. The leader rubbed his eyes, thinking it was a trick, but the truth was clear. One of the older women lifted her hands and cried, "He has set us free." The light grew brighter, wrapping them in a soft glow that healed their wounds. The bruises from beatings faded. The pain in their feet disappeared. Even their tiredness melted away. But something else was happening, something even greater. The light began to move toward the soldiers. They screamed and tried to run, but the desert ground seemed to hold them still. The voice spoke again, "Why do you fight against the one who loves you?" The leader's sword melted like wax in his hands. He fell to his knees, his face pale as he stared into the light. For the first time, tears filled his eyes. He whispered, "Who are you?" And the voice answered, "I am Jesus, whom you persecute." Every soldier trembled. Some began to cry. Others covered their faces, unable to look at the light. The believers stood watching, hearts pounding. The desert was glowing now, as if heaven itself had come down. Yusuf stepped forward. "Lord," he said softly, "what will you have us do?" And the voice replied, "Forgive them." There was silence again. The 20 Christians looked at one another. Forgive. These men had captured them, tortured them, were moments away from killing them. But the voice of Jesus carried peace so deep it melted every anger. Yusuf turned to the soldiers. "We forgive you," he said gently. "Because Jesus forgave us." The leader looked up, tears falling. "Why would you forgive us?" he asked. "Because love is stronger than death," Yusuf replied. Then the wind began to move again, slow and soft. The light started to rise into the air. The ground trembled lightly as if it didn't want to let it go. The believers knelt as the light lifted higher and higher, until it became one with the stars. But even when it was gone, its glow remained in their hearts. The soldiers were silent. None could move. The desert felt different, holy, alive, changed forever. And then, from far above, a gentle rain began to fall. In a desert where rain was almost never seen, drops of water sparkled in the light of the moon. It was as if heaven was washing the land clean. Yusuf looked at the others and smiled. "He is with us," he said. Even in the desert. That night, the soldiers untied the rest of them, knelt before them, and said, "Tell us about this Jesus." The believers knew then. The miracle wasn't only for them. It was for their enemies too. The desert that was once a place of death became a place of rebirth. When morning came, the desert no longer looked like a place of sorrow. The golden sand glowed softly under the sunrise, as if touched by heaven's fire. The smell of rain still lingered in the air, fresh and pure. The soldiers sat quietly in a circle, their weapons lying forgotten beside them. Their eyes were red from crying. For the first time, they looked not like enemies, but like broken men searching for light. Yusuf and the other believers gathered near. No one spoke at first. There were no chains, no ropes, no swords lifted. Just silence, and peace. Then the leader of the soldiers, whose name was Rashid, slowly stood up. His hands trembled as he faced Yusuf. His voice was rough and low when he said, "Last night, we saw something that cannot be explained. I have killed many, but never have I felt my heart break like this. Yusuf looked at him, his eyes calm. It is not fear, he said softly. It is Jesus calling you. Rashid's face twisted with pain. Why would he call me? I hurt his people, because he loves you, Yusuf replied. Even when you hated him, he still loved you. Rashid sank to his knees. His soldiers followed, one by one. 20 believers and a dozen soldiers knelt together in the desert. The same ground that was meant to drink their blood now became the altar of forgiveness. A quiet wind began to blow again. Yusuf raised his hands and began to pray, Lord Jesus, you saved us from death. Now save these men from darkness. The others joined in prayer. Their voices were like a gentle song carried by the wind. As they prayed, something beautiful happened, something no one could forget. The soldiers began to weep openly, not from fear, but from freedom. The burden they had carried in their souls for years started to lift. Rashid pressed his hands to his chest and whispered, I feel light inside me. Yusuf smiled. That is his love. It is stronger than the sword. When they finished praying, one of the soldiers picked up his sword, stared at it, then threw it far into the sand. The others did the same. The metal glinted under the sun before vanishing into the dunes. We will not fight again, one said. We will tell our people what we saw. The believers nodded. Yes, Yusuf said. Tell them Jesus lives. That day, they built a small cross out of dry sticks and stones. It stood tall in the middle of the desert. Around it, both soldiers and Christians prayed together. The desert became silent again, but this time it was not a silence of fear, it was peace. Even the air felt different, like heaven was still watching. As the sun climbed higher, Rashid turned to Yusuf. What do we do now? He asked. We go home, Yusuf said. But we are no longer the same. What we saw here must be told to the world. And so, with the cross standing behind them, they began their walk out of the desert. Their footprints, 20 believers and 12 soldiers, blended into one trail. The same desert that was meant to end their lives became the very place where new life began. That night, as they reached the edge of the desert, they saw the same bright light again, only this time high in the sky. It shimmered like a star that wouldn't fade. Rashid looked up, tears in his eyes, and whispered, he is still watching. Yusuf smiled. He always will. The sun rose over the desert again, but this time its heat did not burn as before. The believers and the soldiers walked together, one group, one heart, heading toward the nearest village. The desert stretched far and endless, but none of them were afraid anymore. Something inside them had changed forever. They had seen the living Jesus. Rashid, the leader, walked beside Yusuf. Every now and then, he looked at the cross they had built, still visible in the distance. I still hear his voice, Rashid whispered. It keeps saying, follow me. Yusuf smiled. Then follow him, even if the world turns against you. They walked for many hours. The sand burned their feet, but they felt no pain. Hunger and thirst were gone, as though the memory of the light fed their spirits and strengthened their bodies. When they reached a small oasis, a pool of water hidden among rocks, they stopped to rest. They drank from the water, cool and clear, and it felt sweeter than anything they had ever tasted. One of the younger soldiers said softly, it tastes like hope. Yusuf nodded, because it is the water of mercy. But as they prepared to move on, a shadow appeared on the horizon. Another group of soldiers was coming, armed and fierce. These were Rashid's superiors, sent to finish the job that he had failed to do. Fear flickered in the men's eyes. The new soldiers shouted from afar, Rashid, you betrayed your duty. You will die with the Christians. Rashid stepped forward, his voice strong. No, he shouted back. I have seen the truth. Jesus is real. The desert echoed with his words. The angry soldiers laughed and raised their guns. Yusuf quickly turned to the others. Do not run, he said. Do not fight. Let the same Jesus who saved us speak again. They knelt together on the sand. Rashid dropped his weapon and joined them. The other converted soldiers followed. Together, they prayed, Lord, show them you are alive. The enemies approached, weapons aimed. The desert wind grew stronger, swirling around them. Then it happened again. The sky darkened suddenly, though there were no clouds. The air filled with a sound like rushing waters. A flame of light, pure and bright, appeared above the praying group. The soldiers who came to attack stopped in their tracks. The heat of the light was not like fire, it didn't burn, it purified. They tried to fire their guns, but the weapons jammed. Metal turned hot and useless in their hands. Panic spread among them. What is happening? One cried. Rashid stood tall, his face shining. He is here, he said. The same Jesus who set us free in the desert. The believers began to sing again, their voices rising against the storm of light. You are the fire that saves. You are the water that gives life. We are yours forever. The desert echoed with the sound. The enemy soldiers fell to their knees, trembling. Some covered their faces, others dropped their guns and began to cry. The light moved through them like a wave, and suddenly the wind stopped. Silence. Then the voice came again. Soft, deep, full of mercy. Those who come against you will see my power, not to destroy, but to save. The soldiers, eyes filled with tears. One by one, they bowed their heads. The desert became a holy place once more. When the light faded, every man there, believer and soldier alike, knew the truth. The power they had seen was not of this world. Yusuf looked around and said quietly, the desert will never forget this day. And neither would they. They stayed by the oasis until night, baptizing the new believers in the same water that had quenched their thirst. When the stars came out, they glowed brighter than ever before, as if heaven itself was celebrating. That night, Yusuf wrote on the sand with his finger, where there was death, now there is life. Then he looked up at Rashid and smiled. Tomorrow, he said, we go back to the city. The world must know what Jesus did. When morning broke, the desert shimmered softly under the sun. Yusuf and the others began their walk back to the city of Shiraz, where the persecution had started. The air was calm, but their hearts burned like fire. They were no longer captives, they were carriers of a miracle. As they walked, more travelers crossed their path. Some stopped and stared at them in shock. They had heard that these Christians were executed in the desert days ago. But here they were, alive, walking in peace, their faces glowing as if touched by heaven. One man fell to his knees and cried, "You are alive. How can this be?" Rashid lifted his hands and said, "Because Jesus lives." Word spread like wildfire. By the time they reached the city gates, a small crowd had gathered, curious faces, frightened faces, and faces filled with wonder. Yusuf stepped forward and spoke clearly, his voice firm but gentle. They took us into the desert to die. But Jesus came. He set us free, not only from our chains, but from fear. The crowd murmured. Some mocked, but others felt their hearts tremble. There was a power in his words that no man could deny. Rashid, once a commander of death, now stood beside Yusuf holding a small wooden cross he had carved from a desert branch. He raised it high and said, "This cross was once a sign of shame. But now it is a sign of love. I have seen the light of Christ, and I will never go back." People gasped, some wept, but the city's rulers were furious. "This is madness," they shouted. "Arrest them all." Guards rushed forward. For a moment, fear flickered in everyone's eyes, but Yusuf simply raised his hands to heaven and whispered, "Lord, show them you are near." A sudden wind swept through the square. The ground shook. The torches hanging by the gates burst into bright blue flames that didn't burn. The crowd screamed and backed away. The guards froze. Then, just like in the desert, a brilliant light appeared above them. It was softer this time, like dawn breaking through darkness. A voice filled the air, gentle, yet strong. "The desert has seen my glory, now let the city know my peace." The crowd fell silent. Even the rulers could not speak. Every heart in that place felt something powerful, an invisible warmth that reached deep inside, melting hatred and fear. One of the city's judges dropped to his knees and whispered, "Forgive me, Lord." Another cried out, "Tell us about this Jesus." And so, right there in the square, Yusuf began to speak. He told them how Jesus appeared in the desert, how he turned death into life, hate into love, and fear into faith. As he spoke, the people listened like children hearing truth for the first time. Many fell to their knees. Some wept openly. The city that once wanted blood began to hunger for mercy. That night, hundreds gathered secretly by the river outside Shiraz. Under the moonlight, Yusuf and the others baptized them, men, women, even soldiers. The water sparkled as if touched by light. The fire of revival had begun. The next morning, as the new believers prayed together, a small boy looked up at Yusuf and asked, "Will Jesus come again?" Yusuf smiled, his eyes filled with tears. "He never left, child. He is with us, always." And far across the desert, a bright light flickered once more, like a promise from heaven that could never be broken. The same desert that once drank blood was now a river of life. The miracle of 20 Christians had become the miracle of a nation. Summary: in Iran, 20 Christians were captured and sentenced to death for their faith. As they faced the soldiers, they began to pray and sing worship songs. Just when the swords were raised, a powerful wind swept through the place. The soldiers fell to the ground, trembling and unable to move. Some said they saw a bright light standing above the believers. The execution stopped. Instead of death, the believers were set free. Even some of the guards later came to Christ after witnessing the miracle. Moral lesson: no human power can silence the name of Jesus. When faith stands firm in the face of death, heaven itself moves. God's light always shines brighter than fear, and his power can turn judgment into salvation. The end.